This is a Nikon FE2, a legendary camera manufactured from '83 to '87. Nikon made the camera as a replacement for the FE, which was made from '78 to '82. Camera production ran from 1983 through 1987, and in 1986 the list price with a 51.8 lens was $354. In 2021 dollars, that would be $945.
I'm going to start off the review with the external controls of the camera. Then I'm going to talk about my likes and dislikes and a little bit about my story. And then I'm going to show you some pictures that I've taken over the last 30 years with the camera.
Starting off on the top plate right hand side, we're going to find the film advance lever, which also functions as an on-off switch like it does with most Nikon SLRs. Beside that, we're going to find the multiple exposure lever, the frame counter window, the shutter release button, and finally the shutter speed dial. On the dial you will see the normal shutter speeds as expected. The yellow numbers are in second increments, while the white are in reciprocals, meaning the white 2 is 1/2 a second, while the yellow 2 is 2 seconds. After that you will see the red 250. That means the highest shutter speed you can fire a flash at is 1/250th of a second. The M250 indicates the shutter speed you can use if your batteries have died. The B indicates the bulb setting, meaning the shutter will remain open as long as you are depressing the shutter release button. That brings us to the A on the dial. In this mode, you choose the aperture and the camera chooses the shutter speed. To get out of the auto mode, you have to depress the auto lock button at the center of the shutter speed dial. On top of the pentaprism is a hot shoe that supports through the lens flash metering. On the left side you will find a dial where you set the film ISO setting, the exposure compensation and exposure compensation lock button, as well as the rewind lever. Moving to the front of the camera, you're going to find a lever that acts as a self-timer when rotated in the counterclockwise direction and an exposure lock when pressed in the clockwise direction. Beside that, there's a depth of field preview lever. Continuing on the front, but moving to the left side, you will have the lens release button and flash synchronization terminal. Taking a look at the bottom of the camera, you'll find the film rewind button. Pressing this button releases the spool so that you can rewind the film into the canister. After that, we find the motor drive coupler, the battery cover, and the tripod socket. Looking into the viewfinder, we see the focusing screen straight ahead, the aperture window above that, and the shutter speed index on the left. The shutter speed needle points to what the shutter speed dial is pointing to. To get the proper exposure, you line up the shutter speed needle and the meter needle by either adjusting the aperture or the shutter speed. If you put the camera in auto mode, you adjust the aperture and the shutter speed will be what the meter needle is pointing to. The metering was weighted 60% inside the biggest circle and 40% everything outside the biggest circle. This was pretty common metering on Nikon cameras until the FA came out with matrix metering.
Cameras of this era didn't have LCD screens and therefore didn't have menuing systems for setting up the various functions of the camera. This meant that buttons, levers, and dials were used for this function. The problem is, on a small camera body, you can only fit so many controls on the body. Camera manufacturers got creative and reused controls for multiple functions. I mentioned two of those examples earlier in the video. The film advance lever is also the on-off switch. The second example was the self-timer is also the AE lock button. A third example is the meter on button. They reuse the shutter release button. So if you just, with the camera on, push the button halfway, it turns the meter on. it'll stay on for 15 seconds. And then if you push it the rest of the way, it takes the picture. I'm going to go over some of the things I love about the camera, and then I'll go over some of the things I don't love about the camera. The first thing that comes to mind in the love category is the construction of the camera. The body is made of a copper aluminum combination, and it's just, when you pick it up, it just feels solid. It's not heavy like my pro level cameras from this era, but it doesn't feel plasticky at all because it's all metal. It's just wonderful. The second thing is it's very familiar. If you look at this shape and most of the buttons and levers, it's almost identical to the FM and my FA, which I will probably do. Maybe I'll do a video comparing them. But you know, it's a familiar design, so the buttons all sort of work the same. The FA's got some different functionality and the FM's got some different functionality, but it's a very familiar form factor. The next thing I really love about this camera is the quartz controlled shutter. When you're in manual mode, you have to pick one of the shutter speeds, let's say like 1/1000th of a second or 1/2000th of a second. You can't go between the two. But if you put it in auto mode or aperture priority mode and let the camera choose the shutter speed, if it determines it needs a shutter speed of 1500, it'll pick it and it'll use that. And so the exposure is going to be highly accurate with this camera. The next thing I really love about the camera is this TTL flash, which the FE did not have and that my FM doesn't have either. So what this does is it gives you highly accurate flash exposures, right? It takes the reading off the film, and so you're going to have very accurate flash pictures. And now for the things I don't love about the camera, and this is kind of nitpicky a little bit, but the first one is you can't use non-AI lenses with this camera. It'll actually break off or bend the little auto-indexing tab. I'll probably do a whole video on that at some point. Also, the on-off switch that I've talked about before, you know, this being on, could be a pain if you actually use your left eye. Then you almost poke yourself in the eye with this thing, and this is it being on. So not much option there for another way to use that. And the third thing I have is the shutters. There's only one shutter speed if your batteries die. Not really, again, these are nitpicky. So if your batteries die, you have to put it on this M250, so you have 1/250th of a second. The FM, in contrast, is the shutter is fully manual. So if the batteries die, your meter quits working and that's it. You can still use the camera. You could maybe use your iPhone to figure out what your aperture and shutter speed should be. So those are the three things that pop into my mind about this camera. And they're all, like I said, a little bit nitpicky. Another thing I love about this camera is that I've owned it for 30 years. When I bought it, I was living in a suburb of Washington, D.C., and my girlfriend, who is now my wife of 28 years, we would go on photography dates. And the Washington, D.C. area is amazing for photography dates. You know, you go to all around the monuments, you know, the cherry blossoms. We would go to Harper's Ferry. We would go to Skyline Drive. That area is just amazing. And so we shot a lot of slides, which is crazy because we don't actually own a slide projector. But we mostly shot slides and then had them made into prints. I have just thousands of them. And this camera has never missed a beat. I probably haven't used it much in the last 20 years, but when I'll probably roll a film through it pretty soon. My wife my girlfriend, or now wife, was shooting a Minolta X700, which we still have, and I will probably do a review of that one in the future as well.
This picture was taken in Yosemite National Park around 1990-91 time frame. and it was on Kodachrome 64, which is what I shot most of my pictures on. The kittens are from upstate New York at my wife's grandpa's farm. This picture is from Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. And this one is the cherry blossoms in Washington, D.C. And this is a toy at a flea market.
Thanks for watching the video of my review of my Nikon FE2. And if you liked it, think about subscribing. And let me know, leave a comment, let me know what cameras you'd like me to review in the future. Thanks. Yeah, shoot. Is the manual, this is, what is this, the shutter timer. Yeah, so and I used it all over the country. Yellowstone, not Yellowstone. One of the things I think is really cool, take two.